Storytime trick or treat. One year for Halloween trick or treating ended in terror for me and my friends. At first it was like any other Halloween night, but then we got to this house. The lights were turned off, but there was a bowl of candy by the door. We went up to the bowl, but it was empty. Right when we were going to leave, the front door opens, and a small frail-looking man says he has more candy inside. We were too excited to think about how stupid it was to go inside, so we did. We went inside. He brought us into the kitchen, and I think that's when we all started to feel weird. Instead of grabbing a pack of candy like we expected, the old man went over to the oven and opened it. He pulled out a tray full of what looked like slime-covered chocolate. He explained it was his favorite candy, and he wanted us to try it. I was gagging on the inside, but I think none of us wanted to be rude. We all took one, but before we could take a bite, the old man said we should all eat it at once. We all knew it was weird, but again we didn't want to be rude. As I was chewing the slimy ball, I was trying so hard not to puke that I didn't realize how funny I felt. I turned to look at my friend just in time to see him fall face first onto the kitchen floor. In full panic mode, I tried to help him, but I just hit floor like a ton of bricks. The next thing I remembered was waking up in a dark room that smelled awful. Both of my friends were shaking me and saying we had to get out of there. We looked around for a place to escape, but we couldn't find anything. It seemed like the room we were in had no windows and no doors. We all spread out and tried feeling the walls for a way out, and right as I was about to give up, one of my friends said, "Over here." We went over, and to our surprise it was a window painted black. We knew we had to get out quietly, but the window wouldn't open. After working on the window for what felt like hours, we finally decided to just break it and move fast. We started to go through the window one at a time. Both my friends got out, and now it was my turn. I started to climb the wall and got the upper part of my body through, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, and they were getting closer and closer. I got one leg out, and I was working on the other when the room suddenly flooded with light. My friends pulled as hard as they could, and I made it out just in time. We all ran and realized we hadn't been gone that long. The streets were still filled with trick-or-treaters laughing and having fun. We never told anyone because we didn't want to get into trouble for going into a random house. A year later, the same old man was found and arrested for kidnapping kids and doing other unspeakable things. Every Halloween I think about how we were almost eaten. Storytime, we thought it was a haunted house. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday, so I like to do everything. Pumpkin carving, hay rides, mazes, and my favorite haunted houses. I heard about this invite-only haunted house, and I didn't want to go alone, so I asked my best friend to get in. We had to find someone who already knew the location, and by some miracle we did. The guy we found said he would tell us where the haunted house was, but he wouldn't under any circumstances go inside with us. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Then he said something that made me think twice about even going. In flat seriousness, he told us to wear sneakers just in case we had to run. I started to laugh because I thought he had to be joking, right? Well, he wasn't, and he didn't crack a smile. As the day got closer, I started to think maybe we should skip it, but I thought I was just overthinking. The night of the haunted house, my friend asked me one last time if I was sure I wanted to go. I told her I was sure, but if I knew everything I know now, I would never have left the house. When we got to the house, we had to check the address again. It looked like a normal house. There were no decorations or lights, and we were the only ones there. We were already there, so we went up to the door, and before we knocked, the door started to open. We were hit with a gust of air that made both of us cover our noses and gag. I wanted to turn around and leave, but I didn't because I was there to be afraid. Walking inside that house is still the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, and the things we saw still torment my mind. All of the walls were covered in plastic, but there was no fake blood like we expected. Moving further into the house made me sick to my stomach because the smell was unbearable. We turned a corner into the kitchen, and that's when we saw a girl tied up. When she saw us, her eyes got really white, and she started begging us to help her. She started screaming and crying with a desperation so intense that I could feel it. That's when me and my friend decided her acting was too much for us. We turned around and ran back out the way we came. We could still hear her screaming when we made it to the car. The next day, my friend sent me a picture that made every hair on my body stand up. It was an apology from the company running the haunted house. They were deeply sorry for the cancellation. Storytime, he was just gone. Every Halloween I go to a local farm and do the corn maze, but there was one year when something life-altering lurked inside the maze. I always do the maze alone, even though most of my friends call me crazy. I thought they were all drama queens until one Halloween. As I walked deeper into the fields, I noticed something unusual ahead. A scarecrow standing with the crops. It wasn't uncommon to see scarecrows in the fields, but this one sent a chill down my spine. Its tattered clothes hung loosely from its frame, and its burlap sack mask was stained with something dark. I thought maybe they were adding some Halloween flair, but as I got closer, I realized that something was off about it. It had eyes, human eyes that seemed to follow my every move. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the unease lingered. I decided to investigate further, ignoring the uneasy feeling in my gut. When I reached the scarecrow, I couldn't help but notice that the burlap sack mask seemed to be stitched together with thick, coarse thread that looked like hair. My heart raced as I realized that this scarecrow wasn't filled with straw. It was filled with something much worse. I carefully peeled back the mask, and staring back at me was a horrifying sight. The wide, panicked eyes of a real person, pale, cold, and terrified. Their mouth was sewn shut with the same coarse thread, and terror washed over me as I recognized the face. It was Tom, a local farmhand who had gone missing a few weeks earlier. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I stumbled backward and ran right into someone. As I looked up at Tom, his eyes told me I needed to run. I have never been so glad that I do the maze every Halloween. I couldn't fathom who could do such a thing, and I didn't want to. I raced back to town, my heart pounding, and called the police. The investigation that followed turned up nothing. When they went into the maze, Tom was just gone. To this day, I can't look at a scarecrow without wondering if it's really Tom. Storytime. Something held me under. Every year for Halloween my school has a party, and we bob for apples. I know it's kinda gross, but it's something we've been doing since elementary school. At first everything seemed normal. We had a large bucket filled with water and apples, ready to take on the challenge. It was all laughs and giggles as we took turns trying to snag an apple with our teeth. But before this one girl, when she said, "I know you're there, help me win," she put her head in the bucket and pulled out an apple faster than anyone else. It was the next girl's turn, and that's when something unsettling began to happen. Each time someone dunked their head into the water to grab an apple, they emerged gasping for air, their faces contorted in terror. They were mumbling incomprehensible words, their eyes filled with an unexplainable dread. At first, we brushed it off as a prank, assuming our friends were playing it up for the Halloween atmosphere. But then it was my turn. I took a deep breath and plunged my head into the water, reaching for an apple. That's when everything changed. As I dunked my head, I felt an icy grip around my neck, pulling me deeper into the water. Panic set in as I struggled to break free, but it was as if an unseen force was holding me down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, and the water around me seemed to somehow get deeper. Just as I was on the brink of passing out, something yanked me back to the surface. My friends were frantically pulling me from the tub, and everyone looked terrified. That is everyone except the girl who asked the air for help. I went right up to her and asked what just happened. She looked at me with a stone face and said thank you for your help. Only, I felt like she wasn't talking to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she called something, and whatever it was wanted to hurt me. We abandoned the game, drained the bucket, and I asked her to leave. Thankfully she just left, but I still felt really uneasy for the rest of the night. I just hope whatever she called left with her. Storytime. The Halloween I'll never forget. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I had planned the ultimate Halloween party in the creepiest, abandoned mansion at the edge of town. The place had been rumored to be haunted for as long as anyone could remember, and we thought it was the perfect setting for a Halloween night party. It all started out great. The guests arrived in their spooky costumes, and everyone thought it was a great idea. But as the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the mansion changed. A heavy, oppressive feeling hung in the air, and the candles started to flicker, as if something was walking by them. That's when we noticed something odd. There was a section of the wall that just hung open. We decorated the whole area, and I'm positive this room hadn't been there before. Curiosity got the best of us, and a small group of us ventured toward the mysterious room. As we walked towards it, the wall slowly creaked open. Even though there was no one inside, the room was filled with mirrors, floor to ceiling, wall-to-wall mirrors that reflected our terrified faces 1,000 times over. In the center of the room stood an ornate, antique mirror that seemed to be looking at us. Without warning, the reflections in the mirrors began to move, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. We watched in horror as our mirrored selves scratched and clawed at the glass until their fingers bled. We should have just ran, but I think we were all too scared to move. Then, without warning, all of the mirrors shattered, revealing tunnels that went in every direction. We could hear whispers and laughter echoing through the tunnels, but we couldn't see anything. I stared in disbelief as a bloody, mangled hand began to come out of the tunnel where my reflection used to be. I must not have been the only one to see something, because the entire room erupted in panic. We all ran out of the room, and then out of the mansion. I never went back to that house, and I still wonder if my reflection is me or something else.